So the good life for Aristotle is a life of virtue. And he has this notion that, and I'm not certain that the argument he gives for it is good, but I agree with the point. I agree with her where he ends up. He says that the good life, the life of virtue, is the distinctively human life. And the distinctively human life is the life where we exercise that aspect of human nature that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. And he thinks that this part is reason. And he tries to find out, or the intellect, and he tries to find out the virtues of reason. And he says that they are, in a sense, there are many, but some of them is wisdom. It's a virtue of the mind. Another is phronesis, or practical wisdom, as it is translated. But basically, this notion is that the rational life, and this is where, in a sense, one of the big dramatic expressions of the idea of the logos and its importance in Western civilization originate from, is that we need to be rational people. Now, I want to hear a bit your views on the reasons he gives as to why we should be rational.
Would it be okay to address some of the other points quickly before we get on to
anything
that?
You want?
So, one thing that I've found strange about Aristotle is that he seems to think that being virtuous leads to a good life.
Yeah.
But I would contend that being virtuous should lead to a good life. There's a moral imperative there. And I honestly believe that virtuous people should be the ones most, for want of a better word, deserving of a good life. But in practice, I think that actually virtuous people are not led towards a good life. So take, for example, politics. You could argue that people who speak their mind and are honest in the pursuit of truth, well, does the political system reward them for this? No, it punishes them. It criminalizes them in some cases. Do people get rewarded by society for being honest about their opinions in a conformity setting? So, for example, someone says, or let's pick the most controversial one, shall we? Your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, says, "Does this dress make me look fat?" And you say yes. And it's the honest answer. It's the moral position, really. Yeah. I mean, because otherwise you'd be lying, you could be giving them a misrepresentation of reality, which is ultimately a self-serving thing because you're prioritizing your own comfort and ease of life over their knowledge of reality. So I'd say that that's the moral thing to do, but would that make your life easier or harder? Well, you're not going to have a nice evening because you're going to have her being very bitter to you for the rest of the evening because you've been rude. So although doing the right thing leads to a better world, I would contest over whether it leads you to having a good life. I think actually it's quite a difficult life, but it should be a responsibility that you should bear willingly because of the effect it has on the world. You need to have broad shoulders to bear the weight of the world, I think is a way of putting it.
I think he would agree with you because he would say that, yes, the life of virtue is not, he would say, of course, he says the good life is the life of virtue. But I think he would say that the sense in which we currently use the word good to describe a life is overwhelmingly geared to our passive nature and does not focus enough on the active nature. So he would view the good life as a rewarding life in a moral sense. But I do agree with you that one of the tragedies of the world is that very frequently we have people who are undeserving of good things, having good things, and people who are undeserving of bad things, experiencing them.
I suppose if you define the good life as simply a rewarding life rather than the ideal life, and stop talking about ideals because, of course, practically speaking, ideals can never really manifest, can they? So if you're just saying the life that is most rewarding given your circumstances, then I would wholeheartedly agree with what Aristotle has to say on this.
Yeah.
So it's just me being a bit pedantic about what good means, I think.
So he would say that virtue is, in a sense, a state of the mind, but not in a passive state, a more dynamic one.
Sure.
And he has this argument that says that there are three states of the mind: feelings, faculties, and dispositions. And he says that we do, let's say, merit moral praise and moral blame for our virtues, and it's only dispositions that merit praise or blame. So he says that virtue is a disposition. It's an excellence of character. It's it's an excellent disposition.
You could say it's a habit.
Yes, and he says that it's the more we practice good things, the more we become better people.
Absolutely.
Of course, he has the intention behind it. It's not like, fake it till you make it.
Well, there's actually a certain amount. Obviously, you've got to be genuine in your pursuit of the virtues. You don't want to be disingenuous about it. But even the fake it till you make it thing, the psychological science behind this suggests that by just simply imitating behaviors you know to be good, you actually habituate and embody them more so and can recall them more easily. So it seems to have some sort of psychological backing. However, I do think it's in some ways a bit of an immoral thing, even though you could have good intentions, because it's disingenuous inherently.
So he tries to give us a guideline, but not a strict guideline in the sense of a rule that constantly do this. He tries to give us some guidelines about how to detect virtues. And he says that virtues are moral excellences. They're excellent habits that are between the mean between two extremes. One, the extreme of a deficiency, the other, the extreme of an excess. And I'll give you some examples. When we are talking about, for instance, our feelings towards danger, he would say that the virtue is courage. We should be courageous in the face of danger. The deficiency is cowardice. And the excess is rashness. Rash are those people who they're really trigger happy and they're really fast to say, death before dishonor. And they constantly think they're being dishonored by everything.
They're pretty much a staple character in all 80s action movies, aren't they? You always have the rash guy who's probably there with a belt of machine gun rounds around him. I'm thinking of things like Platoon, that sort of thing.
Now, let's come to the idea of pleasure. He says that the virtue is temperance, in a sense where we restrain our appetites, where we don't give in to pleasure and temptation so much that we lose our reason. And he says that the deficiency is insensibility. It's when people, they just look at, they don't care about pleasure at all. And it's as if they're resigned to a life of hardship. And the excess is licentiousness. There are plenty of licentious people in 80s movies as well, I think.
That's true. It's just going to be our frame of reference for all of Aristotle's virtues, his 80s film, apparently.
And in the case of social conduct, he says that the golden mean, the virtue is friendliness, and the deficiency is cantankerousness, or being difficult. That's like people who are, you would say they are not open to the possibility that you could develop into friends. They just want, just completely dismissive of you from the first place.
Yeah, dismissive.
And the excess is obsequiousness. And obsequious people are, in a sense servant-like. They are trying to say, I'm a rug. How do you want to step on me?
The kind of servile, slave-like in their adherence to being agreeable. And I think in the psychological literature, the people who are high in agreeableness are actually easiest to scam and con and are most gullible to the more malicious people. So it does seem to be backed up. And I really like this means of conceptualizing things, because it simplifies the language we use to describe moral virtues in such a way as to make finding a balance between two extremes to seem almost obvious. And I think that's a really useful and practical tool for people to embody virtues, because you can just say, okay, well, I want to examine this aspect of my life. Well, what's the two extremes, and what seems like a reasonable trade-off between the two? And that's something that you can do psychologically. And that, therefore, allows you to, once you've conceptualized the mean virtue, as in the one that's in the middle, then you can use this as the central concept to then draw threads out to certain behavioral patterns that are the physical manifestation of this virtue. So in terms of enabling people to act morally, this is a very powerful concept, and one that I've used myself for many, many years.
And one that seems to me to be, as we said in the beginning, not geared into abstract notions like pursue rightness, be a good fellow. It shows us the circumstances in which the need for exercising virtues arise. And I think that it's really good for a kind of moral instruction.
Yes, because you can kind of dichotomize it as the external stimuli, as in that's the situation, so feelings of danger or things like that. And then you've got the psychological on the other hand, which are, say, cowardice, courage, or rashness. These are the emotional states.
I want to ask you something about obsequiousness and agreeableness from a psychological perspective. So to my mind, obsequiousness has, let me rephrase it, agreeableness. It can have a benevolent intention, in that
yes,
a person wants to understand and recognize the other person and wants to somehow establish rapport, and they are agreeable. It seems to me that in obsequiousness, there isn't such an intention behind necessarily. It seems to me that in obsequiousness, we have people who are, in a sense, scared so much of standing out that they don't want to appear as if they are stirring the waters.
There is also another element to this, and I'm going to channel my inner Dr. Peterson here and say, think of the sort of Jungian archetype of the overbearing mother, and there's this sort of archetypal understanding of this notion of a mother that is so overbearing in her love that she suffocates her child by hugging them so tightly. That sort of notion of you've got to have a measure on your temperaments. You've got to have control over your inner feelings in a way. And if you're feeling too agreeable to someone else, or too strongly in a favorable sense, then it might not actually be appropriate for the situation at hand. I think that's another way of looking at it. Although I do agree that that's certainly a part of it, that people are simply fearing social reprisals, aren't they? And therefore overcompensating for it.
Would you say that there's a link between having an overbearing, hovering parent makes one into being overly agreeable and sometimes obsequious? Or not necessarily?
I mean, I'm not sure of the literature, but just anecdotally, I could certainly see something like that in that you would be conditioned into adhering to their whims, right? In that they would demand quite a lot of you, and thus, by merit of them demanding a lot of you, you would be raised in a way in which you're always constantly looking to appease that demand.
So you're habituated in an environment where other people take decisions for you, and you are not empowered to become an autonomous individual.
And that is the main problem with being overly agreeable, is that you put other people's agency above yourself.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.